I'm Olga Bonfiglio. Today, we're struggling with one of the most difficult and complex of issues, which is splitting us apart as a nation and a world, the conflict of the sacred and the profane, or otherwise known as the religious and the secular. Nationally, this struggle comes in the form of issues like the separation of church and state, stem cell research, gay marriage, abortion, birth control, just and unjust war, prayer in the schools, sacred symbols in the schools, religious commitments of politicians, just to name a few. Internationally, we find the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam pitted against one another in a cultural turmoil over land, resources, ideology, symbolism, and sometimes tolerance for each other's mere existence. In many parts of the world, this struggle over the sacred and profane has resulted in war, terror, and continued animosity. For the United States, a secular society by design, we have relied on our laws, particularly those which provide for the separation of church and state. But as that separation has diminished or blurred over the past 20 years or so, we have likewise seen a rise in religious fervor and a questioning of our morals and values. And, of course, September 11 has challenged us to new dimensions of conflict with Islam and Judaism. Finding resolutions to these struggles challenges us more now than ever, because, as some people contend, the answers which we seek to our questions about the sacred and the profane can be found in neither the sacred nor the profane. In fact, we are bombarded by greater questions, dichotomies, and contradictions. So, how can we resolve our questions? Professor Rudy Siebert of Western Michigan University is going to try to help us understand what is going on in these conflicts so that we can approach our differences and find greater clarity and greater harmony among ourselves. Professor Siebert is a scholar of religion and society in the Department of Comparative Religion at Western Michigan University, where he has been for the last 40 years. He has taught and worked with colleagues throughout Europe, the Americas, the Near East, Asia, and Africa on the problem of bringing together the sacred and the profane. We welcome him here today for the next hour to talk about his insights and experiences on this important topic. Rudy, welcome. Rudy, what is the conflict between the sacred and the profane?
Well, it is of course a very old type of a conflict in the Western civilization. And it has happened only in the Western civilization. China had a beginning of modernization, but it stopped somewhere. Greece had a beginning of it, but the modernization process really broke through fully only in Europe at the end of the Middle Ages, and that has never happened before, as far as we know, in the history of the human species. So it means that people who had been trained by the church to think in scholasticism and so on, suddenly turned to worldly things. They turned to nature, also in their paintings and in their music and so on. So all the different fields of science, Copernicus and Galileo, and then of course Darwin and Marx and the modern sciences and so on. And all this moved further and further away from the church, from the Western church. First from the Roman Catholic paradigm of Christianity, then from the Protestant paradigm and so on. So a deeper and deeper abyss happened between the two sides. We have it today, for instance, some people believe in creationism, other people believe in evolutionism, and these two things do not get together, and they produce great difficulties. For instance, Hitler was educated in a Catholic school by priests and nuns and so on. He had, in the morning at 11 o'clock, he had a class on evolutionism, at 12 o'clock a class on creationism, and nobody was able to get those two things together. So then he made up his own position, and we know what came from that.
Now, is this a conflict in philosophy, or who decides these dichotomies such that we cannot break through them? How does this happen?
Well, we can see it concretely. Let's see in the life of Galileo, for instance, who simply developed mathematical formulas, and he sharpened the lenses. He suddenly could see more around us, and so he brought about this turn, that the sun does not turn around the earth as it looks, but that the earth turns around the sun, exactly opposite and so on. Now, our language is conservative, and so we still go to the Lake Michigan and say how beautiful the sun sets and so on. But of course it doesn't set, how beautiful the earth turns and so on. So, but it is scientific insights which separated more and more the secular from the religious side. Or the demythologization, the secular side separated itself from the myth. The science penetrated the religions. For instance, the religious people had taught that Moses had written 5 books of Moses and so on. Science, historical sciences, higher criticism and so on, slowly discovers that he has maybe written part of it. He certainly didn't write the end of it, because that is about his own death. People usually don't write about their own death. But so step by step, when I studied in the 50s, people still thought that Moses had written part of it. In the meantime, we know he has not written anything of it. And so science penetrates even into the sacred realm. And so you can also see now in the different religions where some people are willing to adjust to modernity and others less and others not at all. Let's see, in Judaism you have the Orthodox rabbi who doesn't want to have anything to do with modernity. You have the conservative rabbi who is willing to make some compromises, and you have the liberal or the reform rabbi, and he is far out, and if you have a Zionist, he is totally secularized. So, and this creates then conflicts inside of the faith community. Now, one doesn't have to be alarmist, because, you know, religions are able to digest a lot of contradictions, but they do, in the long run, they have become dangerous. And we have more dead religions than living ones. So, I mean, the Roman religion is dead, the Greek religion is dead, and so on. So religions can die. God maybe cannot die, but religions do.
Back up just a little bit. What is modernism? I think this is the conflict that we have right now with the among the religions, is revulsion of modernism. Could you give us some, define what modernism is? And it is connected with science. I thought it was just political. Or is it?
No, it goes through the whole social institutions, it goes through the whole culture, and it goes also in the psychology of individual people. Let's see, Karl Barth, for instance, would stand in Rome before the Biblical Institute, and he said they could write up there also, "We are atheists." That means a modern man studies the New Testament or the Old Testament and so on without any religious presupposition. That means that this is revelation or whatever. They say the Jews create this document, or the Christian community created this document, and so on. So modern means an emphasis on the subject. If you find a Muslim today, he will still say that God spoke through Gabriel to angel Gabriel to Muhammad, and so on, and forget, you know, that the writings of the Quran have many elements which belong, you know, into the 7th century or so. It is heliocentric. I mean, the earth, the sun still turns around the earth, and so on, in the Quran, like in the Old Testament, like in the New Testament, and so on. So the modernity means that man becomes aware of his own productivity, that the revelation is more and more a matter of man's own production, and so on. So now later on, you know, all kinds of things. This is a modern vacuum cleaner or whatever, you know, the word of modern, you know, gets dissipated slowly and so on. But in reality, it means that man becomes aware of his own autonomy, of his own thinking, and then applies thought to religion. So they look at the 613 mitzvot, for instance, in Judaism, and there is one which says the high priest should marry a virgin. Well, first of all, there are no high priests anymore since the year 70, and virgins, we may run out of virgins as well. So therefore, this law has somewhat become obsolete, I would say. So that means how far, and Maimonides, the great Jewish scholar, would say reason has to do something with this, you know. We must not simply take now this law there and just keep it on in spite of the fact that there are no high priests and virtues anymore, but we have to think about this, you know. So reason has its right, because God created us with reason, so we should use it. And so if you follow this line, you know, of rationality, then it's called rationalism, or it is called the bourgeois enlightenment and the Marxist enlightenment and the Freudian enlightenment, you know. And the more you go through these enlightenment movements, the more modern you become.
Okay. So in the modern era, we have reason, we have individualism, we have science, we have the rise of the bourgeois group.
Yeah, this is the class which carried it to a large extent, right?
Okay, and the bourgeois replaces the monarchy and
right.
the
guillotined them all, right?
And the priests.
Right. Well, I mean, it was a very slow process. You see, the in the so-called Dark Ages, between 500 and 1000, the cities broke down. All the Roman cities were dead. And then the Europeans began to build these cities again. And the burghers, this is the bourgeois, the blacksmith, you know, and the carpenters
The
and so on.
craftsmen.
Yeah. Right. And so they became more and more productive. The feudal lords didn't produce much and so on. So by the 15th century, by the 13th century already, these burghers, these bourgeois guys, recognized we are really producing the wealth and so on. And these feudal lords, their castles, their beautiful castles, don't do a thing and so on. So, but then the bourgeoisie, the feudal lords, you know, pushed them down again. They tried again in the 16th century. They were beaten down again. And in the 18th century, they rose politically and guillotined their masters.
Okay.
And from then on, some kings remained in England, but he became a constitutional king. He had nothing to say. He was just a symbolical figure and so on. So that is the triumph of the bourgeoisie. And they carried this tremendous science, and they did things which the world had never seen before. Flying, you know. They dreamt of flying for probably 2 million years and 3 million years, and they did it, you know, the Wright brothers and so on. So this is the tremendous accomplishment of the bourgeoisie. And in religious terms, they privatized religion. First, they guillotined the bishops too and sent them in exile. Then they found out it is much better to use them than to kill them. The communists have never learned this. So therefore today they use them. In a Machiavellian sense, religion, when it's useful, it's used. If it's not useful, it's just ignored.
Can you give an example of what you mean by that?
The war issue, you know, or if the president needs the Catholic vote or whatever, he will be very religious and so on. But if the same Catholics say that the Iraq war is an unjust war, according to 7-point just war theory of Augustine, he doesn't listen to it and ignores it. Right? So,
and I guess by the same token, the conquering of America by, say, the Spaniards, they brought their priests as well?
Right.
Does that fit into that? Or?
I mean, Columbus was Jewish probably, right, and comes from the cities there, which had in the meantime developed. And then they said, you know, they wanted to bring salvation or whatever to the poor little Indians, a totally wrong name for it. You know, he didn't know exactly where he was. And so the whole way gets a completely different, you know, the wrong name.
Okay.
And but it was, of course, it was gold and so on. To what extent they still believed really, you know, the religious thing, but all the chaplains came along, yes. And so the whole race was annihilated in the name of the cross or whatever, you know. So
okay.
But that is part of modernity. Yes, that is the beginning.
How you've been in your specialty is religion and religion in society. Mm-hmm. Why is that important to you? How did this come to you? This specialty.
I felt this, you know, intuitively this struggle, this conflict. The first time, of course, in the Hitler period. So I grew up in Nazi Germany, and I was in a parish in which the pastor was very prophetic, and as a prophetic fellow, he soon came in conflict with the fascist government, fascist movement, and the Gestapo took him in the basement. He was beaten up, and so on and so on. So I thought at that time, you know, that all Christians, you know, were in resistance and so on, but not even 1% were in resistance. You know, they all went along with Hitler. Mm. We had a concordat. The Pope had a concordat with Hitler. You know, it was Salazar, with Franco, and so on. So and I saw this suffering.
And the concordant, you know, was
a treaty between the Vatican and Hitler. You know,
that said
which is still valid today in the German Federal Republic. The priests are still paid according to Hitler's Concordat, yes.
Okay.
So, what I saw was not, the cooperation, but what I saw was the struggle between the two sides. And so the Hitler government, Hitler talked a lot about providence, that he had to go to war because providence and so on and so on, but it was all phony, it was in reality a completely secular affair. He wanted to have land, he wanted to have colonies, he wanted to have Eastern Europe, like the British had India, like we had South America and so on. But, sometimes he talked about providence, and so many pious people in Germany were being had. They thought he means it, and he thought Providence sent him to them because he was able, to get 7 million people into work in 2 years. They thought, the Messiah had come. But these religious forms, were used for totally secular purposes, and not only secular purposes, but secular purposes which were absolutely contrary to what the Sermon on the Mount or the Decalogue or whatever are teaching, And so then I became, interested in religion overall because I found it at its best in this resistance, not in conformity, to the horror which goes on, but rather in opposition to it.
Well, and you were a young man at this time,
Right, yeah.
In the Catholic youth movement in
Right.
Germany, and you were learning from a former fascist priest who became converted
Right.
to the Sermon on the Mount, you might say, and then went against Hitler. So this was a very scary period
Right.
for you as a young man. You were in Frankfurt,
Right.
which
yeah.
was one of the more liberal towns, tolerant towns.
Yeah. It was a very liberal town. It was a very Jewish town. That is where the Jewish finance and so on was situated, and so everything went very peaceful, and it was very open and so on until this horrible backlash came. I came out of a swimming pool, in November, on a dark November day, and suddenly I saw the synagogue burning, and I had no idea what that meant. And the amazing thing was the fire engines were there, and nobody extinguished the fire. They were just standing there to see that the other houses would not catch fire and so on. And I came to the main street of Frankfurt, and all the the lights were thrown out. That's the so-called Crystal Night, because a young Jewish man had killed a German official in Paris, and so that was taken as the occasion for this struggle. But the deeper thing is, that on one side now I had these religious values, right, and on the other side there was this completely secular type of a society which had values which were absolutely contrary to what I had learned and so on. So now I still give a sermon every year in that church in which I grew up there. And this year I talked about how to talk with other Christians, how to talk with Jews, how to talk with Muslims and so on, because nobody does. And we didn't do at that time neither. And I told this one example, which of the old Jewish woman who I
Yes.
met there on one morning. I went with my bike to humanistic elite high school.
This was when you were still a youth in
42,
school?
yeah.
Okay.
So my bike didn't work, and so I pushed the bike down, and so I see an old lady, about 70 or so, walking, and she had her suitcases, and she put them down every 3 steps and pulled them up again, and so I drove behind her, and then I thought maybe I can help her, put the suitcases on the bike, and so then I come in front of her, and I see the huge Star of David on the left side, a yellow star. And there is this taboo, Now in the church people, they had told me that it was a horrible crime what was done against the Jewish people and so on. But as far as the Hitler Youth or the secular type is concerned, they told me that I was not allowed to speak to her, and she was not allowed to speak to me. And so it was an awkward moment, but I just started, and I said, well, couldn't I put your suitcases on this? And she was very shy. And but finally she opened up, and she said that the police had come last night, and they told her, to pack everything what she could, and to take her suitcases down to the air shelter of this Lessing Gymnasium where I just was going to.
That's your high school.
High school there, yeah. And so I said, well, where are you going? And she said, well, and then we will be taken by a train you know, to Eastern Europe in a nice village, they told me, and I can live out my life in, you know, instead of the big city here, in a nice village and so on. That's what she knew, and what I knew, or whatever.
You believed her.
Well, we
her
both,
story?
you know, were in darkness
Okay.
about this, you know.
You didn't know about
Because,
the
well, we
concentration
should have-
camps at the
We should have
time.
known, you know, because these, everybody knew that there were working camps. Now, what is a 70-year-old woman doing in a working camp? She could not even carry her suitcases. So we both should have known that there was something strange going on. Well, when we came to the school, there was a big murmuring already down in the basement and so. And a young SS-man came up, and these SS-men, they were not like the SA, you know, proletarians, working class, but they were middle-class people, well educated. They played Chopin, you know, after they killed and so on. So, and he came up and he looked at me, you know, with his suitcases, and he looked at the old lady, and he couldn't grasp it. He couldn't grasp it, what was happening, you know. And he said, "What are you doing there?" And I said, "Well, I helped the old lady to carry her suitcase. They're heavy, you know." And he said, "How can you, as a Aryan boy, you know, help a Jewish pig to carry her suitcases?" And I said, "Look, she doesn't look like a pig. She looks like my grandmother." Now he thought I was Jewish, you know, and so he really became angry, and he was shouting and screaming, you know, to the whole school, and demanded that I would be punished for this unbelievable crime and so. And I must say, to the honor, you know, of this humanistic outfit, that I was never punished for it, you know. So when I went up there, the staircase, I was late anyway, and so in one class they read the Genesis, you know, which these people in the basement had created, you know, about God's image and so on, and they trampled on God's image down in the basement, you know.
These people in the basement, these are the Jews that
Yeah.
are awaiting
Which were
to be
already
transported.
collected, yeah, and where
Okay.
she was going to.
And this
yeah.
is in this institution, this high school, which
Right,
is...
and this beautifully high level, high culture type of a thing. And in another classroom, then they read in Greek, you know. I mean, we read the Old Testament Hebrew, as I still do today. And in the other class, they read Plato in Greek, you know. Plato, the dignity of man, this whole beautiful Greek humanism and so on. And down, you know, people were treated in this horrible way. So there you see, of course, that the modern civilization, you know, in its secularization process, suddenly collapsed. You know, it was a total collapse of the Western civilization. And unfortunately, you know, this process has not stopped with Hitler. And that brings us, you know, to the present disaster in which we find ourselves. So therefore, this issue of religious and secular and the relationship and the secularization process, you know, became intuitively very important for me for this and many other stories, because I was, soon afterwards, I was drafted to the Air Force. You know, the German troops were fighting against atheistic Bolshevism, which was supposed to be Jewish too, in Eastern Europe, and there was no defense for the cities when the big attacks came. And I know when people, you know, when I got the draft thing there,
And
I was just 16 years old.
You were
know.
16.
And so I had learned in the Catholic, there you see the religion again, that the war goals of the Hitler government were wrong. That means to colonize other people, you know, and so on, is not a Christian thing to do. And so, but on the other hand came these, so I didn't go first, I stayed at home. The next day an officer of the Air Force came and he took me. The force and said I had no choice. And so, but then in the night, when I was the first time in the airport, then Frankfurt was bombed, you know. And usually through these bombardments, you know, sometimes in 45 minutes, 80,000 people were killed. They were not soldiers, you know, they were civilians.
Civilians.
And so I thought, you know, that sometimes countries can have the right war goals, but use criminal means to do it. And so I, you know, from then on, I did defend one city after the other,
So
Frankfurt and Mannheim and so on.
You were an Air Force pilot in the
Right,
German
right,
Air
yeah,
Force.
right.
You were defending your city,
Right.
Frankfurt, or
Well, Frankfurt and
others?
Kaiserslautern and Landstuhl, where the American Air Force
Okay.
is still now today.
and
yeah.
did you shoot down
18,
Allied
yes,
planes?
18
18?
bombers, yes. Not that this made much of a difference, but you could always distract people. They would throw their bombs in the forest instead of into basements with women and children and so on. So, and up to today, I still think that the defense against terror attacks on open cities is justified morally, that one can do this, you know, and should do this. And I have discussed this with American pilots, you know.
American
in Grand
veterans.
Rapids, veterans and so on. We have a wonderful relationship, and they understand that very well, and they want me to come back all the time. And I said, you know, what we should discuss is once, who got us up there so that we were shooting at each other, you know. You were 20 and I was 17. Why the hell, you know, did we shoot at each other?
Yeah.
So, but you know, my point is here, the double values, you know, which you have, and this happens in everybody practically, you know. If you are here in Michigan, you know, you may have a grandmother who still thinks about premarital sex and selective birth control and divorce and so on, like the Pope does, even if she's Baptist, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But her daughter may say, well, you know, divorce is not a good thing, but sometimes you need it, you know. Maybe negative birth control is not such a good thing, but what if you have 4 children or 2.2 children already, then it's too much, you know,
Okay.
and so on. So then you have this double thing, you know, and it's possible that the next generation, which I have in my classes, you know, that they can't even remember anymore what the grandmother thought, and that therefore she becomes totally secular.
So, as a young man, you were thrust in this conflict
Right.
between the sacred and the profane right from the start. It was a constant struggle of determining what your course of action
Yeah,
was.
right.
What you saw happening was so contrary to what you had learned as a Catholic,
Right.
namely the Sermon on the Mount, the Golden Rule, and
Or
yet
any religious position, because the golden rule, you know, we find in Judaism, we find
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, and so on. So it is
do unto others as you would
wonderful,
have
yeah,
them
right.
do unto you.
Right, right. So
And yet, there
and
was...
on the other side, you know, from the secular point of view, there was another law, which is called the aristocratic law of nature. That was Hitler's law. That means, you know, in nature everybody eats everybody. You know, there's the predator and the prey, and you have to make sure that you are the predator and not the prey. And that is in absolute opposition to whatever Isaiah and Jeremiah and taught, you know.
Okay.
So, and this is the conflict. So the conflict has many, many forms, and it happens on the level of institutions, level of culture, and in the psychology of everybody who has to make a decision from day to day. And what I tell my students is not to avoid this, but to be honest about it. So if you have become a secular person, say so, and be happy with it, you know. And if you are still religious, then say so, you know. I think it is psychologically not very healthy if one thinks, you know, one is still religious in spite of the fact one has become secular, or if one is already secular and vice versa, you know. So
Okay. Well, let's try that out with some issues, okay?
okay.
Let's take the most important one that has happened to us in just 2 years now, September 11.
Yeah.
It was a tremendous shock to all of us to have those planes slam into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and then one out in Pennsylvania. And I've even heard one religion writer talk about the Middle East came to America. We had pretty much not thought much about it, and then all of a sudden when those planes came, they were Muslims that presumably shot or brought those planes into the trade towers. The Middle East then became an issue for us, and we are now confronted with it. Let's look at the question that the President asked: why do they hate us? And let's start there with under your look at from
Right.
the religion and society
Yeah.
point of view.
Yeah, it obviously, you know, it has to do with many things, with economic, political, but it certainly has a religious core. I mean, Muhammad Atta, who was the leader of the whole group, or the Testament, you know, and we know the Testament, and we know that this was religiously motivated. So the question is, you know, what did they attack, really? What did they want to attack? Now, they obviously did not attack the St. Patrick's Cathedral, you know, no, in New York, nor did they attack the Episcopalian Cathedral, the new one in Washington, D.C. It sticks out, you know. In Washington, you cannot build high skyscrapers, so the cathedral, you know, is right at the horizon, so it would have been very easy. But what they attack from their point of view is the financial center, Wall Street and so on, because that is the center of stealing, according to them, you know, because they have still, like the Catholics once had, a taboo on interest taking. So, and interest taking is, of course, the core of capitalism. So, therefore, for them, Wall Street represents, one crime in the Decalogue, namely stealing. And they attacked another completely secular thing, and that is the Pentagon, who, according to them, does the killing for the stealing. So the army goes forward to Iraq, and now all the businessmen are following. You see, in order to the big businessmen who get the billions, and the small ones who could not even get millions at this moment. But so therefore, these were the two targets. There is a third target, which may still come, and these are the mass media, the pundits, and also the politicians who do the lying, by which they cover up the stealing and the killing, so that the American people don't know what they're doing. And I think that has something to do that we still have not understood the whole thing. That means we very often think we are a religious country. I'm not entirely clear how that has happened, because our economy is totally religious. That is totally secular. That means it is steered through instrumental rationality, and it is steered over the medium of power, medium of money. And the polity is steered over instrumental rationality too, and also, but then over the medium of power. So both are regulated either by money or by power, or by combination of money and power. There is not any religious principle of Islam, Buddhism, or whatever in it. Even if you take the Constitution is not a Jewish document, it is not a Muslim document, it's not a Christian document. It is not true that the United States, that the Declaration of Independence, the Bills of Rights and so on, that this is a Christian document or whatever. It's a deistic document. The fathers of the Constitution were trained by the encyclopedists in France and so on, and developed the same type of thinking. The deistic God is one who has created the world, but he has left it. That means the world is as such atheistic, and God is wordless. And there is still immortality, and there is still morality, So these are the three things of deism. And that is what the Constitution is built of. So the creator God, in the Declaration of Independence and so on, is not the Christian God. And it's not the Jewish God, neither the Christian God. It's Trinity and incarnation. There's nothing about the Trinity, there's nothing about incarnation. But also the Jewish God, is transcendent, but he is also at work in the life of every person, and in the life of the Jewish nation, and Haaretz, the land, he is concerned with it, and so on. So he is very much transcendent, and he is very much immanent at the same time. At the same time is the true for Islam. So therefore, we are the first secular state ever founded, and it is this secularity which is under attack, because they have the impression that we are imposing this secular culture, either in the form of the bourgeois revolution, and that's us, or in form of the socialist revolution and enlightenment, that this is imposed on Islam, like say the separation of church and state, is completely foreign to Islam, because it's to Judaism, because these are life forms which include everything. If you say, well, religion is fine, but religion should stay out of marriage, religion should stay out of economics, religion should stay out of politics, well, where the hell is it? It isn't there anymore, you see. And a religion which cannot expand and so on is dead if it cannot develop. So that is the deeper reason, There were things before. I mean, September 11 is a horrifying crime which has been committed, And theologically, that somebody has the arrogance, to sit in judgment over others, or to say that God told him to make a war, or to kill 3,000 people, or whatever.
Or to fly planes into the towers.
It's theologically unbelievably questionable. Even the Old Testament, when Yahweh says, that this or that tribe has to be annihilated with women and children and so on and so on. I mean, it's very questionable if this is really coming from Yahweh, or if it is rather coming from a certain level of evolution in which we find ourselves.
Now, one of the confusing things for Americans is they hear that Islam is a religion of peace, and yet these guys that hijack the planes are called fundamentalists and extremists. Do they not represent the religion of Islam, the religion of peace? And that's hard to pull that together. And then they attacked these secular symbols of the United States.
Well, I mean,
How do you
actually,
pull that together?
actually none of the Abrahamic religion, nor think of the Bhagavad Gita and so on, the war story, you know, none of them is a religion of peace. That means they all have war. In Christianity we have the Crusades, you know, we have the war of one Christian nation against the other. I mean, the Germans and the French, you know, butchered each other for 400 years, and they had all army chaplains. Hitler had army chaplains, the SS had army chaplains, and so on. So neither Christianity as a historical reality, nor Islam, you know, the whole conquering of the North African coast and Spain and Istanbul and, you know, Constantinople and so on. I mean, all this, or the attack on Vienna and so on. So, I mean, no, none of them, not Judaism, not Christianity, not Islam, are peaceful
Okay.
religion. But they have shalom, or they have salam, right? They have the ideal that there should be, let's see, alternative future number 3, a peaceful type of a society. That is the messianic hope, you know, and of course the weakest point of them all is the parousia delay. All 3 religions believe that the Messiah will come and will bring his realm of peace, but this Messiah hasn't come. The Jews are waiting for it for 2,800 years, you know, the Christians for 2,000 years, and the Muslims for 1,400 years. That's a long time for poor human beings, you know. So the religions, you know, were involved in innumerable wars and butcheries of the most cruel form. Religious wars are particularly cruel. So, but they have this longing, they have this hope, you know, of the Messiah coming and to interrupt the horrible continuum of history and of this lex talionis, of this retaliation, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and going on and on and on without any end, you know.
Okay.
So Jesus did not want, like people, you know, apologists sometimes say, Jesus made great history, and so on. Jesus did not want to make history at all. He wanted to end history. The God of the Abrahamic religion is the end of history and not the continuation of the butchery. So wherever these religions then lend themselves to this kind of butchery, you know, they become very problematic. And that the Messiah has not come opens for all 3 religions a very painful open flank into which every materialist or atheist can travel,
Well,
can drive an attack.
Is part of the reason why they attacked the towers was to bring on the end time for the Messiah to come? Is that part of...
Atta does not have eschatological considerations. It is simply that we are Satan people. That means we suffer from apostasy. We have lost it. But even when I was in Kiev
So
recently...
he's punishing us.
Well, yes, to some extent. When I was in Kiev, you know, where you have the Orthodox paradigm of Christianity, the Archbishop under the Patriarch of Constantinople, you know, he said, you know, of course, Europe is apostatic. That means... So he asked me what am I still, you know, belong to one of these paradigms? And when I said yes, he said, do you still practicing it? So behind that question is that the West has become totally secularized, totally profaned, and that lives in apostasy. And I think that this is the same thing. We use religion in a Machiavellian sense in order to get, you know, peaceful little believing people who may still read the Bible, you know, into political goals which are in utter contradiction what all these texts stand for. And but that nobody who would really be genuinely religious would ever dare to use it in this, to instrumentalize it, to functionalize it. As soon as somebody functionalizes and reifies religion, you know he has lost it. So, and this is, you know, as we are, the Russians are for them, you know, the representative of the second wave of secularization, the socialist revolution of 1918. And they think they did them in Afghanistan. They think they brought communism down. Well, communism isn't brought down, they are only regrouping everywhere. And, you know, Reagan didn't bring them down either, and so it's a complicated thing. But they think so. Mm-hmm. And they think that they now have to bring down the origin of this, namely the bourgeois revolution of 1789 and 1776. And so that's us.
Okay.
That is behind it. And then it is, of course, also revenge. All the tanks which are rolling around in Palestine, you know, the Israeli tanks, all American tanks. So in reality, they think this is really our war. And for all the killings there, they took revenge. But
revenge on the Israeli and Palestinian
well, they think it's
situation?
It's our thing, really. And bin Laden has even broadened the whole thing. He thinks that nobody ever declared Hiroshima and Nagasaki war crimes. So he included into the revenge, the lex talionis, also Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He includes the terror attacks on German and French and so on cities in the Second World War. So whatever I mean, even the annihilation of the Indians, what the Indians call the Red Indians, or the enslavement of a whole race here and so on. They take revenge for this, you know. That means they apply the law of eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The 3,000 who died, in their eyes, are not innocent. They are part of this Satan people. So now, as far as any enemy is concerned, it is important that you have a clear picture of how your enemy thinks. This is the most essential part for your self-defense. And if what he thinks is true or untrue does not matter, because even if it's untrue, it will make history. And I think we have still not understood what the whole thing is about, you see, and in what kind of a struggle we are involved here. And then if we would know that, then maybe we should think, you know, if we should maybe, instead of taking 6 times the investments out of Russia, maybe 3 times, you know, lower the stealing a little bit, what they call stealing, you know, and instead of killing in different parts of the world, you know, maybe just do half of the killing, you know. And one cannot stop all that on such half of the lies, you know. I mean, if Fox News would just cut the lying into half, you know, still every second sentence would be untrue. But it would be an improvement, you know.
Well, let's go back to something else that you talk about, the retaliation, because presumably the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, was retaliation on our part for the attack on the World Trade Towers and the Pentagon. And that's the lex talionis, the law of the talon, which is the retribution.
Eye for eye, tooth for tooth.
Okay.
And in the Quran it says, you know, free man for free man, slave for slave.
Talk about how our response to September 11 led us to that, and what meaning that has to us, and also to the Muslims that we are fighting now.
Well, when we, you know, when this happened, and then the president took action and so on, we wrote to the Congress and to the president, you know, not lex talionis, but policy change. Not lex talionis, but policy change, you know. Now, if a Muslim politician, you know, takes revenge, or if an Israeli politician takes revenge, he has the backing of, to some extent, has the backing of his Holy Scripture, you know. But even there one has to be careful, because a Muslim scholar will say that the 4th commandment in the Sermon on the Mount, you know, you should not, you know, retaliate, or not eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and so on. That this is a very nice expression of love and so on, and if you can do that, if somebody strikes you, you know, by the way, Jesus didn't do that when he was beaten on one cheek, he didn't hold up the other cheek before the Sanhedrin, but asked very well, why do you beat me, you know, so it's a very complicated thing. But nevertheless, you know, also Jewish scholar would recognize that this is a very nice ideal, but you cannot use it in domestic policy, and you cannot use it in international politics, because the other one thinks you are weak and so on. So they very often say it cannot be done, but Mahatma Gandhi did it, and he did it very successfully, so it can very well be done. When I gave the sermon recently in Frankfurt, the people, the Germans now suffer because they're all the Muslims and all the Turks, and sometimes, you know, a Turkish guy pushes a German old lady from the bench, you know, and says, you are gone, you know, we are in now, the next chancellor will be Turkish, and so on. And so the old man got up in the audience there, and he said, do I not have a right to defend myself? And I said, yes, you do have a right to defend yourself. I think we have to make room for the first reaction, the guts reaction. The guts reaction is, if somebody hits you, you hit him again, you see. If somebody had met Eichmann, you know, in Argentina or whatever, and a Jew, and would have remembered that his relatives were killed in Germany, would have shot him on the street, everybody would have understood that, because that is our first reaction. You know. But then there comes a second reflection, in a certain sense, you know, and say, so, okay, so I hit him again, you know, and then, of course, he will not shut up. He will hit me again, you know. And then you get into utter irrationality, which we have now in Iraq, which we have in Palestine, and everywhere. And then slowly, in the second reflection, one sees that the first guts reaction, may not be all of it. But it needs certain levels of reflections there. And I think one has to make room for the gut reaction, that I want to defend myself and I have a right to defend myself, that's true. But when you think a second time, this Talion thing can only work when you can annihilate the other completely, but seldom can you annihilate the other. How do you annihilate all the Iraqians, or just the civil war now? So how do you annihilate half of them there, involved? So then it becomes irrational. It shows that the fourth commandment, of the Sermon on the Mount, which sounds so irrational, though stupid, hold up the other cheek,
idealistic.
That means not so stupid at all. If you translate into political science language and say that, for instance, particularly the most powerful one of the opponents, that he should make the first step, because he takes less of a risk. The little guy, stones to throw and so on, it's harder for him. But maybe the bigger guy can take the risk to wait with the next attack in order to see if some relaxation sets in and if one can break this iron chain, this spell under which people are, that they have to retaliate next day. Otherwise they lose their manhood or whatever if they don't kill the same way like the other killed the last day. And so.
What response would, if you were President Bush, what would you have done if you did not use 9/11 as the lex talionis?
Yeah.
What would have been the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount way to do it? Especially since we were the superpower anyway.
Yeah, well, in the between the two wars, the Germans tried to commit terror acts here. And one day, a German diplomat met the old head of the British Secret Service of the First World War. And the German asked the British Secret Service director there, there are these plans now, what do you think about it? And the British Secret Service man said, if I was Hitler's friend, which I'm certainly not, but if I was his friend, I would tell him not to do it. Because if you begin to blow up things here, then Americans will see a spy and a terrorist under every couch. They will become mad. And when they're mad, you cannot make them unmad. And that's exactly the situation. See, it's not a very irrational situation. It's very understandable. Because I do not in any way want to diminish, the criminality of this act, the shock of this act, what is so idle is an idle, the financial stuff is an idle for us, and they hit exactly that idle and so on. So and that's how we became mad, So in that sense, I do not want to be President, Bush, and I'm very happy, particularly now, and I cannot be. I've become a citizen too late. But well, it depends who he is, to our theme here. Is he really a religious person? Is he born again or whatever? Then he has one solution, of course, Or is he just a secular man who uses religion, for political purposes sometimes and sometimes not, and so on. Now that, as the head of state and so on, the violation of the sovereignty of the United States and so on, that he has to take action, that is for sure, Now, if this action has to be taken in that speed, in this anxiety, in that madness, where he cannot identify really who did it, and then to attack a country when he has a movement. So one must say that his situation, our situation, is a very, very difficult one, also in terms of international law and so on. But I think it was too rash, and it was also other motivations entered the whole thing. There was a plan to attack Iraq long ago, and it seems that this motivation to attack Iraq got mixed up with a terrorist type of a thing, and it was muddled up. And I think the whole decisions, and this is always how real decisions are made, you know, you are not always in the best shape when you make a decision, and the country was in a hysteria, in a hysterical patriotism, not a constitutional patriotism, because the Constitution suffers in the whole thing, but some kind of a national type of illness in a certain sense, you know. And so therefore we do not want to sit in judgment, you know, the responsibility of the president is immense and so on. But let's assume he was, he would be a Christian or whatever, and who has the right to deny it to him when he says that? So if he was one, then of course he would have taken seriously the Sermon on the Mount, and he would have taken seriously the fifth commandment and not demonized, you know, the other side, for which he will pay if Saddam Hussein is put on trial. It has started already, you know, like Milosevic. He's on trial for 2 years, and the judge has become insane in the meantime. So this will not be very easy if you take the demonization back, you know, and you see the real guy. The real guy may be worse in a certain sense, but the demonization, you know, is something which would be forbidden by anybody who is serious.
So once again, we see this muddied water between the secular and the profane.
That's right. Yeah, but
or the
has to make
sacred and the profane.
Unfortunately, what I think, you know, is that it's not so genuine Christian, because, you know, by their deeds you will know them, and not only by their babbling around on Christmas or when they go to church or whatever. So Reagan was more honest in that. He never went to church, you know. So, I mean, but see, this is sad, you know, that it becomes part of the imagery, you know, political images which are built up. And but if he would have held on to the fifth commandment, he would not have done the demonization of whatever comes along. We know today that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with September 11th. So the false, you know, demonization even on top of it, and so. And he would have taken serious the fourth one, and would have said, you know, for instance, explored what the attack was about, you know. Why do they hate us so much, you asked. You know, I go to Croatia recently, and the taxi driver says, we hate Americans, you know. And then you find out slowly, you know, they don't hate all Americans, you know, they hate this government, you know.
The policies.
Which violates the Geneva Convention and international law, goes at its own, does not respect the UN, and so on and so on. That's why they hate us so much.
Now, speaking of Croatia, you have done a lot of work in the last 25 years or so in Dubrovnik, which is nearby, and Yalta, working on what you call Future 3 of trying to bring together the sacred and the profane. We have just a little bit of time left. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing with these folks?
Two projects. Once the president of the University of Zagreb, Ivan Supek, came here, traveled, a famous quantum physicist, Heisenberg student, and he invited me to come to Dubrovnik in his new institute for postgraduate studies, and so I did. I gave 2 talks, and in both of these talks I ended up with a chapter on the future of religion. And so the professors of Zagreb University, it was a communist time, was on the Tito, said it was a wonderful thing if I could introduce a course on the future of religion, and so I did. And so we had this year in April, it's 40 years, no, not really, since 1975, so it is, I think, the 30th year we have soon, 2 years or whatever. And so the last one was, for instance, the future of religion, Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, seedbed societies of the modern West. So our idea was, the West is in a tremendous crisis. How do you overcome a crisis? By thinking where you come from. Our religion comes from Jerusalem, our philosophy and science comes from Athens, our republicanism, in the broad sense, comes from Rome. And so that is what we discussed then. And next year we will talk about conceptions of religion and modernity and post-modernity. And then the next time we will talk about the conflict of the civilizations, which has been developed here in Harvard and so on. So, and then I opened up a sister course in Yalta, and the theme there is religion and civil society. Because the plan was to reintroduce civil society in Eastern Europe. It failed. When you read George Soros, you know, you will see why it has failed. George Soros says, because we penetrated, the corporations went in there, took 6 times the investment, you know, and without any social thought. That means without ethics, without government control, and the reaction of the whole of the Russian Federation, but also the Ukraine and so on, was horrifying. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to have a civil society. They want to have a civilized one, and they don't think ours is very civilized. So, and when I came in Simferopol, you know, the Air Force came in last October. The head of the airport, you know, came right away, and he helped me with the suitcases and all the formalities, and then took me to his office and got vodka early in the morning at 10 o'clock and so on. And then the next word was, you know, I'm Marxist, we will remain Marxist and so on. And I was in Kiev, the whole parliament is communistic still, so there is a tremendous resistance against us. But still, you know, if they want to reintroduce civil society, we ask the question then, what will happen to religion? Or what role can religion play in the introduction of civil society? And so that is our theme in Yalta, and the future of religion is the theme in and it's a university project of Western Michigan University, and they've made at least a symbolical contribution, you know, to practically 25, 27, 28, 29 years. Yeah.
This is a lifetime of work.
It is, yeah, and we had scholars from all around the globe, and we published, you know, our work, and continue to do that now. So we did what we could, and this theme, you know, the religion, the secular, and how to solve this conflict was always the main motif. Yeah.
One of the things that you bring up in Future 3, as you call it, is Future 1 being administrative, Future 2 being militarism, and Future 3 being help me with this.
Yeah.
Alternative global
society, yeah.
Reconciling society. That conversation is, communication is the major, that's the starting point.
Yeah, if you have no discourse, you have war.
Discourse.
In the family or in between nations and so on. Yeah, that was one of our principles. Really.
How do you get people to sit down? Well, that we'll have to take up in the next program.
Okay, very good. There will be a next one. That's
all right.
Wonderful. Yes.
Well, I appreciate very much talking with you. This is stunning.
You're welcome.
To be with you, and we appreciate your wisdom and knowledge and experience. Thank you very much.